Why political correctness is the problem, not the solution. I assume one can clearly say that the so-called political correctness, or in short PC, is the great trend and the rising ideology in the whole Western world. Now it is very easy to rant and to complain about this, but it is not such an easy task to really tackle the issues with the whole PC idea. Far from being complete, I wanted to approach a more serious critique toward the ever-spreading political correctness in our Western civilization. For one thing, I think it is a very striking fact and something giving much too little attention that political correctness is a phenomenon essentially existing only in the permissive societies of the West. To grasp the far-reaching meaning of this, one has first to describe what defines political correctness. PC is not some sort of oppression or censorship in the classic sense. Censorship is an authoritarian society like Russia or China would be if some elite censors speech in a clear interest of its own power. As such, oppression of this kind is relatively easy to discern as oppression, and in reverse, people are aware to be oppressed and can seek to find niches where to develop their free thoughts. This happened in almost all oppressive societies, like the Communist Bloc or Fascism. The thing which makes political correctness so much more dangerous is that the oppressed usually do not feel the oppression that the PC ideology causes. It masks the censoring nature as benevolent, introduces itself to people so that in the end they think these PC ideas in their mind were not put into their mind by others, as it is, but they think they came to these points of view by themselves. Sociologically, we call that internalization. It is mostly some sort of brainwash. The person brainwashed with PC no longer realizes these ideas were put into his mind by someone else, and that makes fighting it so tiresome and challenging. The victims of the political correctness are also the culprits. You have to make them realize their own victimization, and that is a realization that naturally people will shy away from. Nobody likes to admit that he has just an opinion because he was talked into it by others. The first common misunderstanding we have to do away is that there are such a thing as facts. Yes, they are basic and simple facts, like I am 173 centimeter tall and 44-year-old, and so forth. Basic stating of facts. But in every sphere of politics and social topics, everything is ideology. So if I call political correctness an ideology, it just means it is a point of view, an artificial perspective like any other. It is no special critique versus PC, it is merely a reminder that all points of view in the area of politics are necessarily ideology. There is no such thing as pragmatic politics. You always have a perspective based on your point of view. I'm always most alarmed by people who claim their political view is not an ideology because they are either dumb because they don't understand it, or they want to sell you something which is simply not. Now the question is, why does political correctness movement only exist in the permissive liberal societies of the West? And the simple answer is a dialectic one, because only a permissive society has this contradiction in itself. Every system of ideas contains the opposite. Without an idea of purity, goodness and righteousness, there is no idea of sin. In a society where permissive, liberal and egalitarian ideas are the dominant ideology, the logical concept of sin must be an idea which contradicts the concept of everyone is equal or everyone is allowed to do everything. Every society of the present and past has had its own definition of goodness and purity, and the moment you define these, you automatically define what you see as sin just the same. Insofar, the first critique against political correctness is that it is a contradiction of itself. PC claims to defend the free and permissive society. It claims to attack the binary ideology of good versus evil, right versus wrong, and claims reality is like a rainbow, like a vast selection of nuances, while itself is as binary in its rigid thinking as any system there ever was. A follower of the political correctness idea will brand everyone who is not agreeing with the PC ideas in the same way as evil, fascist, and corrupt, as any Puritan Christian or fundamental Muslim will name-call the disbeliever. Only that the religious fundamentalist never claimed to stand for anything but fundamentalism. Whereas lies the lie of the PC creates such a stark contract when it claims to stand for liberty and is as illiberal as any other fundamentalism there ever was. Political correctness is a system with great similarity to the moral of the Catholic Church in the past. The Christian faith began to define every person as sinner and guilty. There was the so-called original sin, and hence in the view of the Christian Church, you and everyone else is from the first day of your life a sinner. So in the view of the Church, the only thing you can do is to admit your sinful character. You can't deny it. That is what is called a closed model. It is an idea which cannot be falsified. If the Bible says all humans are sinners, you cannot disprove it. And the only way to get out of the trap is by admitting it and then do some ritual. In the Church, the ritual is, say, praying 20 Ave Marias or Lord's prayers, and to continue your redemption, you have to preach the word that every human being is a sinner. Political correctness works in exactly the same way. Every person is per definition a sinner, in this case a racist, as a man a sexist, and so forth. If you deny that, you prove in the eyes of the PC apostle only how deep your guilt is. It is an accusation you cannot disprove to them. It is a closed circular system. I have one example. In a German newspaper, which I regularly read, the followers of the political party in Germany, AfD, were called all Nazis. And when one reader asked why this is so, the journalist answered that they are Nazis because the AfD is a Nazi party. It is a circular logic. The party is a Nazi party because the followers are Nazis, and the followers are Nazis because the party is a Nazi party. It is the same logic the Inquisition applied during witch hunts, the same McCarthy followers applied during the communist hunts in America, and the Stalinists during the cleansing in the USSR. Once accused, you cannot escape the accusation. And yet worse, in internet and shitstorm days, you can neither clear your name. Guilty by suspicion. Just as the Catholic Church monopolized the moral by this trap, so does the PC trap people today in a circle of admitting guilt and finding a redemption only through joining the PC Church and preaching the PC gospel yourself. The same as the Church saw everyone outside the Church as evil, so you are a bad person in the eyes of the PC followers if you have a different set of ethics. It is as binary as it gets. However, the similarity with the Christian and Puritan morality goes even deeper. If you have sinful thoughts or said or did something sinful in the Christian sense, like something with sexuality, the Church expects you to put on a good appearance. We all know, even with the most Puritan regime, people had the same perverted desires all humans of all ages ever had and ever will have. Puritan moralists know this, but they expect you to keep the facade. It is like the Asian Confucianism. It matters only that you keep up the nice facade. That is what matters, to support the system. And if we analyze any Puritan society, we can see that the oppressed instincts grow all the more bizarre and violent the more they are denied. There were more people alcoholics than in the Prohibition era in the United States. If you oppress natural instincts, they grow into monsters. And the same happens with the PC movement. Political correctness does not really care what you think about blacks, gays, Jews or women. It only cares what you say, what formalities and rituals you practice. As long as you stick to the appearance, you are fine. The result is the natural aggressive instincts of all humans become oppressed instead of worked on. Unlike everything you are denying yourself to be part of, it gets out of your control. Morally Puritan systems thus logically always developed rather violent systems. If you look at the moral of Christ and the nice message of the four Gospels, many people have wondered how such a nice and good message of peace and harmony could be so twisted as the Church, the witch hunts and the Inquisition. No, on the contrary, exactly because the Christian moral was so focused on purity, cleanliness, perfection and goodness, it contained the other side within it. All extreme ideas of purity contain their dialectic opposite. The idea of purity creates the idea of sin. Without an idea that marriage is holy, there is no sin of adultery or prostitution. One creates the other. So one of the big problems of political correctness is a general and profound misunderstanding of the human nature. It is an error of thinking which is the root of every error in the liberal left. This is the true reason why socialism and communism never will work. Human nature is not harmonic. For a liberal left, since the earliest days of the movement, the human nature was defined as good, as seeking harmony, and every occurrence of struggle, competition or war were explained as mistake or error, as result of some wrongdoing, some oppression or evil plot. And so society would just have to find and eliminate those mistakes in order to create a harmonic society. The problem with this left idea is that human nature is not as they think. A human is not born nice but made corrupt. Conflict and competition, egoism and struggle, the desire to compete, to have more than someone else, to value your own kind higher, those are natural instincts of the human character. The result is that every single left-wing society always ends in the re-education camp because the left simply cannot accept the true nature of humanity. That is not to say that we are all evil, vicious and selfish. We too have the desire to be loved and accepted, to have peace and natural curiosity. But humans also have this other side. These are not good and bad side. Competitiveness, greed, love for the kin are necessary features of humanity. Like all characteristics, it is a matter of dosage and application which decide whether it is a cure or a poison. It is natural for men to regard women different. It is natural that human beings trust their own kin, their own family, their own tribe, their own culture more than the stranger. People need the feeling to belong to something, to define themselves as more than just an individual, like a random atom, but to have a common identity. And all systems of identity create an in-group versus out-group mechanic. People simply cannot live without. That means, in simpler words, nobody can treat everyone equal. That is a bizarre and entirely inhuman expectation. One will always see those who are like us and those who are like them. And every human being will naturally see the in-group as somewhat better than the others. So the same as the Christian morality was based on the oppression of an instinct that could never be overcome, vilifying the sexuality, so does political correctness base their morals on an instinct that equally is a part of humanity, the instinct to form group identities and the entire social dynamics which come from that. The result between what the Puritan moral, church moral caused are most similar to what the PC ideology creates, a fearful society. Just like in the late Middle Ages and early modern times, humans were mortally afraid of anything related to sex, so are people today with anything branded evil by the PC, mostly race, and gender. The problem is, real life is so vast and diverse that the human mind necessarily needs to sort people in some way. We simply would be totally overwhelmed by reality if we had no system of prejudice, if we would look at every human as a singular phenomenon. We would be entirely incapable to function in a densely populated modern society. If we see someone, we automatically sort that person into various groups, by age, by gender, by culture and race, by what he or she wears for clothing, by the way someone walks or talks. We take what we experienced and predict what person that is. Now in a society where doing that is the greatest taboo, like the political correctness code demands, people start to become risk averse. Every social interaction suddenly becomes a risk. If a man wants to get a date with a woman today, he is conflicted between the role expectation on the one hand and the PC code on the other. So what people more and more do is they avoid the risks altogether, not only in dating, though in that sphere the issue is the most visible. The result of this problem is people close themselves in rather than risk embarrassment versus a PC code. So it does the opposite of what should happen. Instead of different groups learn about each other, they close themselves in and avoid the risk of contact. They become so uncertain of themselves that many choose rather to stick to themselves and their own kind of people. And here too lies the root of a very dangerous development in politics. Now, while political correctness at the moment is more an annoyance than a danger, there is an even greater risk in the way it changes the political landscape. What I fear is indeed the rise of a new totalitarian system. The problem is that the liberal left are totally working the wrong way, the way they warn of totalitarianism. The liberal left still think the way of the 20th century and expect a new totalitarian regime would rise in the form of fascism, like the Third Reich. This is why they always seem to see Nazis. No, that is not the threat. That is just an old spectre of the last century. If a new totalitarianism rise, it will work very different. This new regime will have you all private liberties. What sort of sex you have, whom you marry, all these little and private things will still be your own. So in this you would be as free as ever. But in everything that matters you will have no say. And in politics we already see that. And what I see is that political correctness paves the way for this. People are again made being used to the idea to hide their thoughts, to adapt to power, to let some greater power control the big things and retreat into private life. Political correctness avoids tackling the real roots of the issues by falsely reducing the issues to a mere matter of facade, of behavior rituals. The problem of women, for example, in the idea of sexism is not tolerance. That is the false idea PC propagates, that we speak about an issue of tolerance. Women do not want to be tolerated. Same with blacks or gays or any other group. Tolerance is not the topic, and behavior rituals are not the solution. They are an avoidance of the solution, a pseudo-solution, which makes it all the more difficult to approach the issue seriously. Someone like Martin Luther King never spoke of tolerance towards black. He wanted equal rights, tangible things like not to be confined to seats for blacks or the so-called mixed marriages were allowed. That is what a real proponent of equality fights for. Equal chances, tangible improvements like equal rights. But tolerance is not the issue, and neither is forcing people to certain words. As a gay man myself, when someone calls me a faggot and says I'm going to hell, that is not a case for morality or law, it is a case of politeness. I find it sad and aggravating if someone says something like this to me, but I do not regard it as something that law has to forbid him to say. It is a matter of value. I value the liberty of speech higher than the hurt feeling of being offended. For if we start down that road, that every personal feeling of being offended is reason enough to forbid it by the law, where does this end? with a Muslim who demands that women are all veiled because unveiled women offend him? If we follow down that road, that feeling offended is a reason enough to have a trigger warning first, then a censorship, and finally a law, we will lose all freedom, because for everything there are some who feel offended about something you can do or say. It is the dialectic paradox and a sort of an irony that the most permissive of societies that ever existed created the most self-censoring ideology that ever was. People cannot live without coordinates. That is what conservatives said all along. As a mild conservative myself, however, I think there are more rational ways to create ethicality and social coordinate than a neo-Confucian code of political correctness.